Hello, Texans and Texans at heart. I'm Susanna, and this is the Susanna Gibbs Show. I've been very fortunate to have two careers over the past 20-something odd years. I've been an insurance agency owner, and I've also been an actress and producer, which is a really interesting mix of art and business. But what it really is I'm a sucker for a good story. And we hear amazing stories from our clients all the time. Artists, entrepreneurs, idealists, how and why they do what they do and how they keep doing it. Because sometimes the challenges and what feels like a defeat make the best story. Now we're going to end this podcast with an insurance tip of the week because the insurance agency sponsors this whole thing. So please stick around for that. And ultimately, please share this podcast with a fellow Texan or a Texan at heart who is also a sucker for a good story. Please reach out to us at giveagencydallas.com. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, even if you're not our client, we'd love to hear your story too. Our next guest was in Texas. He is in Arizona now, but he had the wildly popular show, Jimmy Neutron, which was on Nickelodeon. It had a couple movies, series on its run. Our producer, Ashley, was super excited when she heard we were doing this. Apparently, she named her car after one of the characters on the show. And every time she'd go to pick up her friends in high school, they'd say, "Got a blast," an homage to the show. So again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate having you. And now, on with the show. So on the podcast with me today, we have John Davis, creator of many things, but Jimmy Neutron was the thing that got our intern the most excited. She has a car named after one of the characters. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you actually are from Dallas, graduated from SMU.
Yes. Grew up in South Oak Cliff, went to Daniel Webster Elementary School, moved to North Dallas, went to Forest Meadows and then Lake Highlands High School, stayed in Dallas, went to SMU, started a business in Dallas. So yes, I was Dallas based for about 50 years.
Wow. When did you graduate from Lake Highlands?
In 80.
80.
Yep.
So I live in Town Creek, which is
Oh yeah.
between Forest
Yep.
Meadows and Lake Highlands. All my kids go there
Yep.
right now. Love it. So
Yep.
fun.
I know exactly where that is.
And when did you leave Dallas? When did you abandon us?
It was about, let's see, how long ago was it? It was in 2014. I got an offer. I had actually, let me back up a little bit. After about a 20-year run with our production studio in Dallas, and after the movie Amplely came out, we hit a gap between projects. And at that point, we said, hey, we need to shut things down for a while, and we kind of regroup. And by that point, I'd gone through the ringer on several projects, and just these animated films, they take so long to make. They take 4 or 5 years to make, and it's absorbing, and it's so much fun. But you don't see friends or family for a while. And after many years of that, it's like, okay, I need to take a break. So my wife and I took about a 5-year walkabout and traveled a lot, and didn't work, and we had residuals coming in, so we could afford to do that, which I was happy about. But then I kind of got the itch to jump back on the roller coaster, and so around that time I was offered a directing gig on an indie, and I said, okay, well, I haven't worked on an indie before. Let's see what that's about. So I moved out to LA temporarily. And thought, well, this looks like it's going to go for a while. So we went through the process of selling our house and moving out there, and that was about 9 years ago. And I went on a couple of projects while I was in LA. They were both indies, Asian finance, and they were very educational. At the end of the last project, decided, well, you know what? We've lived 50 years in Dallas. We've lived 8 years in LA. I want to get out of the big city, get to a smaller town. My wife and I both really loved desert, and we checked out Tucson and loved it. And so they call us halfbacks. We moved away from Dallas, and then we moved about halfway back. So
Gotcha. Gotcha. Why? So you said it was interesting. The Asian. I can't. I don't. I want to get to the animation stuff of Jimmy Neutron, but since we're on California and the Indies, what did that mean?
Yeah,
Interesting is
so
such a layered word, and it can mean so many things.
right. Well, it was interesting because I'd never worked done business with China. The first project I was on, it was fully China backed, and everybody has different experiences. My experience was that, hey, I always got paid. They paid me well, but you never knew from one moment to the next if the project was going to keep going. And after about 18 months or so, and we had solved the story problems of the film. That's the big hurdle you get on. You're starting off. You're trying to find the story. It's a big struggle. Then finally you find the story. Everything clicks. You go, this is it. Great. We're over the hump. Now we're really pulling forward. And then suddenly they pull the plug. I get a call. We're sorry. We are out of money. It's
Mm,
like, okay, I guess we're done then.
yeah.
And so that was my first experience, and then I had another experience. I got on another indie film that was Asian backed. It was a combination of China and Japan, and similar but different issues. A lot of it was just cultural too. They wanted to make a film that would travel outside of Japan, outside of Asia, and so they wanted to hire a Western writer, Western director, and the problem is that they had to have something that played to the China audience, to the Japanese audience, and to the Western audience, and that's a really tough nut to crack. And so, like the first attempt, we did our first animatic. An animatic is when you in animation you basically take your storyboards and embellish them, and you do a sketchy version of the entire film, and then you edit it to music, sound effects and everything, so you can actually sit back and watch the film in a very sketchy form, but you understand how the film moves, where any problem areas are, if the story is making sense, if the characters are paying off. And so we did that, and on the first screening, and the screening went great. The European partners loved it, the Western partners loved it, but then China had a problem, saying, well, this is not going to play well to Chinese audience, and so then we started chasing our tails. Like, okay, now we're trying to please this audience, and now it doesn't work in the West, and after about 4 years of that, I just kind of threw my hands up and went, this is crazy. We can't get off the starting gate.
So, with that many cooks in the kitchen, I mean, did you have when you were? We're gonna just jump all over the place. It's gonna be fun.
Sure.
So, when you were doing Jimmy Neutron for Nickelodeon, how many people did you have to answer to then, or was that kind of like how much creative control did you have when you were doing it?
Right. It's kind of like the way I describe it to people. It's like a door is wide open at the beginning of the project, where you can kind of like toss anything in there, and you have a lot more free reign. But all the time, that door is slowly closing as you're approaching the end of the project and money's running out and you're reaching your deadline. And then the changes are fewer and far between. You really got to stick to it because the studio wants to know what you're delivering. And so at the beginning, you've got a lot more free reign than you do towards the end of the project. In my particular case on Neutron, there's two producers that I work with, Julia Pister and Karen Rosenfeld.
Were they yours or Nickelodeon?
They were, one was Nickelodeon, one was Paramount.
Oh, okay.
And then Sherry Lansing was the head of Paramount at the time, and so that was kind of the pecking order was the two producers, and then Sherry Lansing, of course, was the head of the studio, and that was kind of it. So there wasn't like a huge group of people. There's really like 3 or 4 people. Albie Hecht was also a big voice, producer on it, who was the head of Nickelodeon at the time. So yeah, there's only a handful of people, which is great. I've been on other projects where there was more than that, and it becomes, you add more voices, it becomes more problematic. It gets hard for everybody to pull in the same direction. And the enemy of those early steps in finding the story is when other producers or associate producers start showing stuff to friends and family and getting their notes. And then it's just like it mushrooms. And it's like, everyone's going to have an idea, but it's at a certain point you have to trust your creatives, and it's like, you know what, everybody's going to have a different thought, but I trust you. And sooner or later, as you go down the process, you're going to have screenings for test audiences, and those are the voices you really want to listen to because they're giving you feedback, specifically on whether the movie's working or not.
Gotcha. What were some of your highlights before Jimmy Neutron?
Well, we started our company, DNA Productions, in '87. Me and my partner Keith Alcorn, and we had been working at a company in Dallas, K&H Productions, at the time. There's a couple of animation studios back in the '80s, early '90s. There was
Now, were you in the studios at Las Colinas then? No, they weren't even around then, right?
They were. I think they went up in the late '70s, I believe,
Oh,
right in the '70s. So they were around, but it didn't really figure into what we do so much because we're not going to be shooting on stages. We're animation. So even though we went and there was vendors there we used like Allied WBS and Film Labs and some producers we worked with office there, but we never office there. We started out of my duplex on Belmont,
oh,
and
Belmont.
yeah, for about the first year, worked out of the duplex, and then we subletted space from my dad's company. He had a civil engineering company. They had to pull back because of recession, and they said, hey, there's some space here. You can have it for a song, and then that helped us kind of get established and have an actual office. And after about 5 years of kind of doing whatever we could do to make money, we did music and animation and motion graphics, and not sure exactly what the company was going to be. But our main goal is that Keith and I were both creatives, we were both filmmakers, and our concept was, hey, let's surround ourselves with the tools we need to do our own short films. And during the day, we're going to do projects for people to try to make money and feed ourselves. But in between projects, after hours, we're going to work on our own stuff. And we created all kinds of little short films that appeared during the day. They had these Animation Celebration and Spike and Mike Sick and Twisted, all these different traveling animation festivals. And so we would enter those. And through the process of doing that, we were exposed to producers outside of Dallas, because we wanted to get into entertainment and not just be a commercial industrial house. And it started to happen. We started to work on some TV shows. We did some stuff for a thing called The Spooners, which was an early series for late night. And we started getting some other TV stuff that was outside the area. And through those short films, and actually that's where Jimmy Neutron came from. It was a short film that I did back in '95. And that kind of started the ball rolling on Neutron, and we had entered that in a Lightwave competition. Lightwave was the software we were using at the time. Around early '90s, there was not a lot of 3D software capable of doing character animation, and it wasn't until I saw Lightwave that came with the video toaster, NewTek video toaster, that I went, aha, there's a bone system, you can actually do skeletal animation, you can do character work. And so it really became a test to see if it was going to be viable. And I had this idea for Johnny Quasar, was his name at the time, it became Jimmy Neutron. And the idea dated back to the early '80s, actually. I had
Is he
actually
based
tried.
on somebody that you know?
Well, funny you should mention that. It was sort of based on me in a way, because the character itself was a way for me to live out some childhood fantasy ideas. Like, wouldn't it be cool to walk on the ceiling? Wouldn't it be cool to walk through walls, or be invisible, or have a robot dog, or build a jetpack and fly to school, that kind of stuff. And it was that sort of childhood wish fulfillment that was the trigger for creating the character. But of course, I wanted to do those things when I was a kid, but I couldn't because I'm not a genius. So I had to make him a genius, and and then it just sort of built from there. But yeah, and the reason he was called Johnny Quasar initially is that I worked in a survey party. My dad had a civil engineering company, so every summer I'd work in a survey party, and they would make fun of me because I was into science fiction and science, and the party chief kept calling me Johnny Quasar, Space Cadet, And I
Aw.
thought Johnny Quasar, because my name's John, and I thought that's a great name. I'm going to use
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
uh,
So you
but
have so. Sorry, go ahead. You can finish your thought.
Oh, I was going to say, but eventually we had to change the name. The lawyers got involved and said, well, Johnny Quasar is a little closer to Johnny Quest, and there's also a Captain Quasar video game. So I had 24 hours to come up with a new name, and my wife and I walked the dog, around the block a few times and talked about it. And finally, hit upon Jimmy Neutron.
Mm, gotcha. And the lawyers get involved. They ruin everything. Um, you have some really great characters on Jimmy Neutron. Like, how do you guys come up with all of that?
Originally, the characters came from people I know. For example, like I said, Johnny Quasar is based on a sort of little avatar for myself. So he gets to do all the things I want to do, and he's science boy, and I love that. So it's loosely based on things that I liked. And then Carl is kind of based on a friend of mine I had in elementary school, whose name was Carl, and he was sort of a big, happy-go-lucky guy, and it seemed like a great sort of friend for Jimmy. Like he could be Jimmy's guinea pig because he's like, okay, Jimmy, I'll just go along with. Yeah, you
Have you
want to
taught?
clone me? Sure.
Does Carl know that he was the basis for Carl?
No, because I've lost track of Carl since elementary school.
How
Yeah,
fun. Carl
he
has
knew
no
that.
idea he's a character.
No idea.
Wow.
And the character Sheen originally started out to be a Japanese character, and because I wanted to I thought it'd be fun to have a Japanese sort of otaku fanboy character, and we had It was based on there was a guy that worked for us, a Japanese guy named Harashin, and we called him Sheen for short. And I thought that's a great name, so it was inspired by him. And
Nice.
I told him that later in years. He's like, "Oh, that's hilarious."
That's awesome. Who was your favorite character that you ever did?
Well, Jimmy is my favorite character.
Jimmy. Yeah.
Clearly, being an avatar for myself. But what was great is just the chemistry of the characters worked so well. And it's kind of like Winnie the Pooh, where you've got Eeyore, very glum, and you've got Tigger, who's like this endless bouncing energy. So you want to have these complementary characters, and so that's why I think particularly the triumvirate of Jimmy, Carl, and Sheen work so well together.
Now, did
And
you guys struck this really good balance between appealing to children while incorporating some humor and themes that adults could appreciate? Did you guys were you sitting around in your writer's room on Belmont or wherever you were at that point going, all right, are kids going to get this? Or adults going to get this?
Yeah, and I think the trick is you consider your audience. It's a family audience. Some things are going to fly, some things aren't. You want to make sure there's things in there that the adults are going to enjoy and the kids are going to enjoy. But it's okay to have some jokes that only the parents get or jokes that only the kids laugh at, as long as you're not out of balance in that regard. So it's just about finding that sort of balance. And I never really thought, like it kind of happens organically. I mean, you're not setting out thinking, okay, I'm going to write to both audiences every time I write any dialogue. I mean, you're not thinking that. You're just kind of writing what feels proper in the scene and feels like, okay, the character would say that. And then later you go back and you go, okay, could we say that differently? Or oh, that's a setup for a joke here that may fly over the heads of kids, but the adults will like. And you kind of start addressing that later. But first, you're just really thinking about story and character.
So you guys also have like a wide range of extraterrestrial beings and in the universe, loosely inspired by any real world happenings. I mean, you live in Arizona, you have to go through Rio Doso on the way.
Right.
I don't know. I'm
Well,
reaching.
back in the day when I created this, I created the Yokians, and I thought, well, the Yokians, the reason they became egg-like is I thought, well, they're so highly evolved that their technology is so fantastic that they just never have to move. Everything happens for them. So over time, they would just atrophy and to like a puddle of goo. And then they become reliant on their little things to float them around. So they have to be contained in like an egg-shaped container and fly around. So they're like half robot, half. So that's kind of where the idea came from. But what was funny is how you kind of psychoanalyze yourself. Going back, I didn't think about it at the time, but later I kind of went, I've always had this weird thing of combining space travel with eggs, because my very first miniature spaceship I made in junior high for an early film I did was made from one of those legs containers. I don't know if you remember the pantyhose called legs.
Oh, yes,
And they would actually sell them in an egg-shaped container. And so I got one of those containers and I made it into a spaceship. And then later I did some other egg-related space type craft. And I go, I guess that's like somewhere in my brain it keeps associating eggs with space travel. So
I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to make eggs for my kids, and I'm going to be pondering why eggs in space now. So thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I'm going to call it John, what is it? Do you think maybe it's this? So walk me through the timeline of like, you write the script. How long does it take you to write the script on average for each episode?
Yeah, right. So it depends on if you're writing, feature script or series script. Feature script, it can take. Here's the thing. There's a misnomer about writing scripts or writing in general for film. You never write the script and it's finished, and then you move on and make it. That never happens.
No.
You write the script to where it's like good enough to be greenlit, and then you go forward and you're constantly writing all the way through the whole process. So if the film takes 4 years to make, you're writing for 4 years because you'd never stop the process. I would say to get a good first draft, if you have working from a good outline, everybody's process is different. I like to work from an outline, show it to the producers so they know where I'm going, and then once they bless it with their notes, then go to town. And once you actually start writing from an outline, you could write in about 3 months and do a feature script. But then the rewrite process will go on forever.
When you guys were filming the series, did you have the series all the way written out before each season started? No.
No. There would be. We had several writers working on the series because series is very different than the feature. The feature, you're telling one big story. With the series, you're telling lots and lots of small stories. And the pipeline for the series is that there's multiple shows being worked at simultaneously, and they're all in various stages. So you have several episodes being written while several other episodes are being produced, and so everything's just overlapping. And you need more writers because it's just so much material. So it's a very different animal on the series. Me personally, what I did was back in '95 when I did that original short for Jimmy Neutron. I had developed a show Bible along with Keith and our Paul. Clairhout was one of our first employees, and Paul's still a good friend. And Paul did all the storyboards for the Bible. I wrote most of the story springboards, several of which became episodes years later in the series. But you basically in a series Bible, you have what the characters look like, what they act like, what their role is in the series. And then example stories so they have a good idea of what the series is going to be. So you go about that far, and then once the project is greenlit for a pilot, typically, you choose your best story that feels like it's going to represent things the best, and then use that for your pilot story. And in our case, we were pitching a pilot for a series, and the whole pitch originally for Neutron was for a series. But once we did the pilot, Nickelodeon saw it and they flipped out on the pilot, and they said, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible! How did you do this? We definitely want a series, but we also want a feature film." And and it's like, wow! It's like it went instant franchise. So all these things, they happen differently. I think in our case, it was kind of amazing us being in Dallas and suddenly being pursued by Hollywood. Which it had always been the other way around. We were trying to pursue Hollywood, and they didn't know who we are. It reminds me that it was kind of funny when we first started pitching in Hollywood and going out there. we had this sort of reaction from some people of, well, if you guys are so good, why aren't you out here? And it was kind of like, well, screw you, And but then later, it flipped. Later, we would hear things like, "Wow, this is great. I love seeing stuff that's not from around here," because a lot of the stuff in Hollywood tends to be kind of creatively incestuous. Things borrowed and everything is kind of similar. And then they see a different perspective from someone that's outside of that system. It's fresh, and they kind of go, "Oh." And then once I kind of saw that reaction, I went, "Oh, there's our calling card."
Yeah.
It's great to not be from around there.
Yes, I've heard that. I remember when you guys, I remember that when you got, I remember hearing about you guys. I remember hearing about your success, as I never worked for you guys. I don't even know if I have some voice actor friends. I'm sure I had some voice actor friends come out and help, but I just remember going, wow, they're in Dallas. That's so cool. Right. And I feel like it was during the time when Dallas was like, there were lots of things going on. Were you able to take advantage of the tax incentives that were pretty robust? Was that something that you guys were able to take advantage of?
Not necessarily for us, because I think that's more of a live action
Is it? Okay.
thing. Yeah.
I just felt like, and maybe it was because LA was like, we were Texas's darling for a little bit. It was
Right.
like we had so many series going here. We had features. You guys, like it was just like we were a buzz for a little bit.
Well, it was funny because when we first started, we got the green light for the Jimmy Neutron feature, and that was
And just remind me, it went feature, series, feature. How did it go? Because you had both.
Yeah. So yeah, we originally pitched as a series. We did an episode pilot for a series, and that's the thing they saw and flipped out on, and they said, we want a feature and we want a series. And I said, well, if you're thinking about doing a feature and series both, then I would propose doing the feature film first, because the nature of 3D computer animation is that the assets take a long time to create. It's very laborious to build all the 3D sets and vehicles, and just everything has to be built. And the nice thing about doing the feature first is you can build Retroville, all the characters, all these environments. You can build them at feature quality, and then you reuse those assets on the series, and the series is going to look great. It's going to look like the movie. And
so when you say build it, are you talking about electronically or physically?
Electronically,
okay.
Building it.
That's what I thought. I was just making sure.
Yeah, because it's virtual building, because
Yeah.
you're literally taking the wireframes in 3D and sculpting and pushing and moving them around to construct everything you see. Every blade of grass has to be built on the inside the computer, but then once you have it, you can reuse it forever, shoot it from any angle. It's like a digital backlot. It's the digital equivalent of a film backlot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What were some, I know that, you've got this huge fan base. People continue to be fans of the show. I'm sure you've had some interesting encounters with fans over the years. You got any you want to share?
Yeah. Well, the fans, who doesn't like fans? I mean, they share a passion for what you love and what you did. And yeah, the fans are great. I love their passion. They're so passionate. They write their own stories. Sometimes they get a little too excited and start, saying, "Hey, I'm gonna call Nickelodeon. Will you work with me to get the series rebooted and all that stuff?" And it's like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. But and I think a lot of them are under the impression that, since I created the character in the show, that I own it. I do not own it, because to get it made, you have to sell the rights. So
wow.
So that
you
was
sold
the thing.
yourself.
You have to,
Yeah.
because if you don't, they're not going to make it. And and to buy the rights, they paid nicely for them, and it was great. And we get residuals because that's how it works. But they have to own it, so that if they don't own it, then they can't control it. And if they can't control it, they leave themselves open to what's going to stop me or somebody else from going crazy and do Jimmy pornos, and it completely, ruins their
Yeah.
franchise that they've sunk millions of dollars into. So,
Yeah.
so to do that, to build that kind of franchise, they have to own it. And I understood that, and it's like, yeah, well, that's the price of admission, that we got to sell it to make it. So,
Yeah. So I did, once upon a time, I was in a web series back when web series were new and developing. And I remember talking to one of the writers and creators towards the end of it. And he was like, I knew before anybody else that it was coming to an end. Nobody knew yet, but I knew. And I was like, well, how did you know? And he was like, they stopped giving me notes. And he
oh,
was like, and
right,
I knew
yeah,
that we were not going to be renewed. What was it like when at the end of, because this was a big chunk of your life that was
yeah.
ending. How did you find
Well,
out what happened?
yeah, I was surprised but not shocked, because often when they have about 60 episodes, they can syndicate it. It becomes a syndication package. Um, so I think that after 3 years and several specials, they had plenty of material to syndicate it,
Mm.
and I think that they could have certainly produced more, but for whatever reason, they had enough. I don't know if it became too expensive for them, or whatever. Uh, I will say that in the entire time we worked on the series, we never went over budget, and we always delivered on time. And usually, when you do that, I mean, you get repeat business like crazy. Which is why I was kind of shocked that when they later decided to do the Planet Sheen spinoff, that they didn't insist that we do it. But by that
You
time,
didn't get to do. I
uh,
didn't know that you didn't get to do it.
yeah, so it was my partner Keith produced and wrote and directed on it. Odekirk was the other partner. I did a little bit of consulting on it, and that's about it. Uh,
Mm.
I in the way DNA worked is that like I said, we started out of my apartment on Belmont, and we never had money. We never had any investors. We were hand to mouth for 20 years. I think we took out a couple of bridge loans early on that we paid off within a year or two, because Keith and I always promised ourselves we're never going to get upside down on this thing. We're not going to get into debt. We're gonna grow slow and sure. And the only big risk we took was actually making the Neutron feature, because in order to make that feature when they wanted it, we had to take a leap of faith and build a facility before we had a contract. And so that was our big leap of faith. And but like my dad used to say, hey, if you're going to gamble, gamble on yourself. Because at least
Yeah.
you can control part of it. And fortunately, that gamble paid off for us. And but yeah, since we were hand to mouth, we always had good timing. When we did the Neutron feature, and then as the feature was wrapping, the series was ramping up, and so we moved our crew. We just shifted them from feature to TV series, and then had 150 people cranking away on that. And then as the series, we knew that it was going to end after the third season. Well, at that time, the Ant Bully was greenlit, and then we perfectly moved the crew back onto feature for the Ant Bully film. So we had this great timing. But then when Ant Bully came out, we didn't have the next thing set up. And at this point, the company was so big, we had 250 employees, that, yeah, we had to shut down, because it's like when your monthly nut is over $1 million a month and you don't have a project coming in, you're not gonna last long.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had to shut down, and it was kind of time. I felt like the shelf life for the company. I think everything has a shelf life, and when Keith and I got into this, we really didn't get into it to build a huge animation company like this, and manage 250 people. We really wanted to create a company whereby we had the tools to use for our own stuff, and suddenly we're,
Hmm.
having to handle and manage all these folks. And we had to do that. We had to build that at the time to make Neutron, because there was no place else to go.
Yeah.
There was the only big animation companies at that time: Pixar, PDI. I think Blue Sky was still doing their short films, and then there was us, and that was it. the rest of the animation that was around were smaller boutique companies that weren't working in features yet. So we were pretty early to the game, and I think that's why we had success, because as CGI became such a buzz, we were one of the few people, early adopters back then, that knew how to do it, and the studios didn't even understand it. I remember when all the people from Nickelodeon Paramount came to visit us after the pilot, and they were all freaking out about it. They said, "Well, we want a movie. Can you make it with the crew and people you have here?" Which we had, I think, at the time, 15 people. It's like, oh, no.
No, no.
No, we have to hire a lot of people and build a facility and do it at a much bigger scale. Um, and the amazing thing about Neutron, there's several amazing things. One is as I got more savvy in the business and become more cynical, you go, how did they ever allow us to do that? I mean, it's kind of unheard of that, these big studios, Paramount, would take a chance on a couple of knuckleheads in Dallas working out of their apartment initially, and have this small group. But we had something they wanted. We could do CGI, and we had the creative they wanted. They wanted Neutron, and so that became our only leverage, because I had never even worked on a feature film before, and suddenly I find myself writing, directing, producing one, and building a studio to create it. So it was instant boot camp for all of us, and it was incredibly exciting, occasionally heartbreaking, but ultimately just completely overwhelming and wonderful. So, but yeah, it was interesting times. It kind of reminds me a bit of what I see now going on with a lot of the AI stuff. People are kind of freaked out. Like, some people love it, some people hate it. Oh, this new technology, it allows you to do all this stuff. It's kind of like, back in the 90s with digital, when digital hit the film industry, everybody's freaking out. And yeah, I remember going.
It's going to ruin film.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember when I got out of college going to LA and thinking, well, I may have to move there to get a job in like an optical house or an animation house. And I remember visiting some, and there would just be a long hallway with all these little rooms, and each room had an optical printer or an animation stand and this old guy in there. And so then, a couple of years later, digital rolls out into the industry. Go back, all those guys are gone. No optical printers, no animation stands. All the guys that ran them are gone, replaced by workstations. And it happened like that,
Yeah.
So it's just like, well, it's the inevitable nature of things to evolve. And it's like you can't put the genie back in the bottle,
Change is the only constant.
That's right.
Yep. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. I wish we had more time and maybe we'll do a follow-up. I love follow-ups. And here would be my follow-up. And I literally have to let you go because I have to go pick up a kid. That's a hard stop. When you talk about the amount of time that scripts take to be written once upon a time versus how I think they're greenlit now, I think we could have a giganto conversation about that, because I watch stuff and I'm like, man, that script probably only got 4 revisions before they took it and started shooting. It's very different, I think, now than 10, 15 years ago. There's so much demand for content. It's just an insatiable demand for content. I'm sure the writers are just like, can I just get a revision, please, before I have to hand it over?
Yeah, and the bad thing is if they don't allow enough time for the process, and you're telling a writer, you have to do this in 2 weeks or whatever, well, they're not going to do their best work. They're going to get all the low-hanging fruit. They're going to, fall back on stereotypical things. And that's true of pretty much anybody, because it takes time to find that story in a unique way,
Yeah. Yeah, and let it grow and let it breathe. So thank you again. I appreciate it. And now, our insurance tip of the week. So I was reading about this. Prince Charles and Biden met, and apparently it was a big to-do because they discussed political things, which supposedly he's not supposed to do now that he's the king. I'm kind of fascinated by it. I'm not going to lie. Anyway, But thinking about climate change, and our guest lives in Arizona, and it's supposed to be 117 this week, and how we are redoing roofs in the DFW area on average every 9 years. The industry is not set up to do it like that. Combine that with inflation and labor shortages coming out of COVID, it's kind of a hot mess, and rates are crazy high. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you are getting all the discounts possible and look for ways to save money. Now, talk to your insurance agent about this. And if you don't have one that you like, I happen to know of an agency that would be so happy to talk to you. Please pass this along to anyone else that you may know who likes to listen to podcasts, or maybe they've never listened to a podcast before. And reach out to us at giveagencydallas.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you. Have a good one.